Chapter 6. Rue burst through the door, very nearly colliding with Miss Valentine, who was heading out, dressed in a long black raincoat and a leopard-spotted brimmed rain hat tied under her chin. Her hand flew to her midsection in surprise, but in a blink she composed herself, taking in Rue's dripping hair and sodden clothing. "If you are hell-bent and playing outside in bad weather, no one here will stop you. But when you get sick, there will be no one to take care of you either." "I won't get sick," Rue said. "I've never been sick in my life." "This house was built for sick people," Miss Valentine warned. "People don't tend to stay healthy here for very long." Her eyes lowered suddenly and stared at Rue's hand, which was cradling the mail beneath her sweatshirt. "Where did you get that ring?" she asked suspiciously. I don't remember you wearing it before." Rue looked at this thin silver ring that she had pilfered from the girls' dormitory, and then lied without any hesitation. "My father gave it to me for my 12th birthday." Miss Valentine's lips pressed together skeptically. "And what have you got under your shirt? You look like you're hiding something." With a deft flick of her fingers, Rue tucked the padded envelope into her waistband while she extracted the stack of envelopes from beneath her sweatshirt. "The mailman came," she said, handing the stack to Miss Valentine. Miss Valentine took the letters and quickly shuffled through them. Her expression lost some of its harshness, perhaps because now she did not have to run out for the mail in the bad weather. "Go upstairs, Rue. Change in the dry clothes, and don't play in the rain." Then Miss Valentine started back towards the other end of the house, untying her rain hat as she went. But Rue didn't go upstairs, not right away. She waited until Miss Valentine had disappeared across the lobby and through a small threshold at the far end of it. Rue followed, waiting until she was sure Miss Valentine was well ahead of her. Passing through the vaulted threshold, Rue found herself in a short foyer that led to yet another lobby, this one far larger than the first. Here, the ceiling was so tall, Rue had to tilt her head back to see it. Covering the walls were dozens of masks, some very wild-looking, made from woven fibers and strung with seeds. Others were carved out of wood or boards, with faces that peered out with alert round eyes, as though she had just startled them. One mask had a curled tongue that stuck out of its mouth. Opposite the front door was a staircase, this one much wider and grander than the other. Its banister was carved, and it twisted up and around to the second floor. Rue thought she could hear voices coming from above, so she ducked into a corridor off the lobby. There were many doors along the corridor, every one of them shut. Rue tried them all. There was a cozy-looking parlor in one, with a fireplace and two plush maroon armchairs facing each other across a little round table. And in another was a tremendously long dining table with a dozen high-backed chairs poised around it. There was even what looked to be a ballroom, with a piano in the corner and wide windows that overlooked the river. Yet every room looked too still. Each time she opened a door, the room seemed to startle, like the faces on the masks. All the rooms were on one side of the hall, just as they had been in the other corridor, only here they were on the right-hand side instead of the left. This detail had struck her as odd when she first saw it, but so many new things were happening that she hadn't had time to wonder about it. Now Rue began to consider this more carefully. The corridor turned greatly as she followed it. It seemed to form a large circle, and indeed, after a few minutes she found herself back at her uncle's office. She remembered her first glimpse of the house from Miss Valentine's vote. It had looked huge, yet from the inside it did not seem nearly as big. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe the house was built to impress people with its size, when it was really a shell with nothing in the middle. Still, the doorless wall looked newer than the rest of the house, and there were no moldings along the bottom or top. It looked as though the walls were an afterthought, something that was built in a hurry and forgotten. The mystery of the wall nudged at Rue's thoughts, but she could find no good solution to it. Back in her room, she pulled the stolen package from under her shirt and put it on the vanity, then peeled off her wet clothes. She changed into a pair of jeans and a t-shirt from her hefty bag, and sat by the window and picked at a cheese sandwich that Violet had left for her. She stared out at the rain and the river and the hummocks of grayish-green islands. She looked for the island where she had seen the boy on the ice floe, but it wasn't visible from the window. The sky was uniformly gray, with no hint of a break in the storm. After she finished eating, she examined the stolen envelope. It was addressed to P. Fanshawe and was marked fragile. Handle with care. Who was P. Fanshawe? The return address, stamped in dark blue letters, said it was from Taylor Baines in Philadelphia. Rue tore open the envelope and looked inside. There was something hard and rectangular swathed in bubble wrap. She pulled it out, picked off the tape at the seams, and unwrapped it. It might have come from anything. A dog, a cat, maybe even the bone of a finger. She shoved it back in the envelope and walked down the hall and put the envelope in the wooden box under the floorboards in the girls' dormitory. There she lay on the chilly floor. The silence in the house had a sound of its own. Thick, pulsing, waiting. She listened hard for the humming, but it never came. It was the loneliest afternoon Rue had ever spent. True, she had never felt the need for other people's company, but now she realized that she had never, ever been absolutely alone. Even in the trailer's crawl space, there were living things all around her. Field mice, ants, spiders. There was even a pretty garter snake that would, if she kept very still, slide right onto her sneakers and rest on them. In the Burroughs' woods, there were wildflowers and foxes darting past, and chipmunks weaving in and out of the underbrush. But here, in this huge house, life seemed to be hiding from her. She closed her eyes and thought about the mystery of the walls again. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she heard was Violet laughing. "There you are," Violet said. She was holding the empty tray from Rue's lunch and staring down at her with an amused expression on her face. "You're a strange little person. Have you been sitting here all afternoon?" Rue scrambled to her feet. Why are there no doors along one side of all the corridors? The question sprang from her mind as though she had just been dreaming about it. "I don't know," Violet answered, looking surprised. "I guess it was just built like that." She turned and started back up the hall, and Rue followed, jogging to keep up with Violet's long-legged stride. "But there's all this space in the middle of the house, just sitting there," Rue persisted. "Why would someone waste it?" Violet shrugged. "I guess rich people don't think about things like that. The summer people around here seem to live by their own rules." "But my uncle isn't summer people. He lives here in the winter too," Rue said. "He didn't always. He started living here year-round after he was married." Violet blushed, the deep, ruddy blush of a dark-haired girl who has said too much. "Uncle Emmett is married?" Rue asked, stunned. After hesitation, Violet admitted. "Was." "Are they divorced now?" Rue asked. "Listen, Rue." She stopped by Rue's bedroom door. "It's not my place to tell you this stuff. Why don't you ask your uncle?" "How can I ask him anything when he'll barely speak to me?" Rue cried. Violet's eyes locked on Rue's. "My mother says that poking around at people's private lives is like rummaging through their bedroom closet. You might find a few interesting knickknacks, but eventually you'll discover something in an old shoebox that you wish you hadn't seen." "I've seen everything," Rue replied evenly. Violet looked at her with pity, a thing that Rue generally detested, but somehow with Violet she didn't mind it so much. "I guess you have," she sighed, then quickly glanced at the stairs, then back at Rue. "Your uncle was married, for a short time, until his wife died 2 years ago." "How?" Violet twisted her lips to the left and considered. Outside, the wind must have changed directions, because now it rattled the windows as the rain clicked furiously against the glass. "It was sudden. That's all I know. I didn't work here back then." "What was her name?" Rue asked, thinking of the package addressed to P. Fanshawe. "Anna." That was no good. "Does anyone else live here?" Rue asked, "besides my uncle and you and Miss Valentine?" Violet cocked her head and blew a puff of exasperation. "I'm beginning to think they switched the real Rue Fanshawe for you. Your foster mother told us that you were quiet as a cup, but here you are yammering away with all your questions." "I have a lot of questions," Rue said, "because everything here is so strange." "That's just because it's new," Violet said dismissively. "It is strange here," Rue insisted. "This morning I saw a boy floating down the river on a piece of ice." Now Violet smiled and shook her head in wonder. Your first day on Cough Rock and you've already caught a glimpse of the Fane. People can live here for years and never spot him. The Fane? That's what they call him around here. I think it's an old term from Guernsey. Most of us Donkey Island people have ancestors that come from Guernsey, an island off the coast of England. We still keep a lot of the Guernsey ways, and one thing we love is stories of the supernatural. Ghosts, fairies, sea people. I think he made the storm come, Rue said. It popped out of her mouth, and it sounded silly to her own ears as she said it. That's not the first time I heard something like that. There's a fisherman who swears he saw the Fane flying over Wigglesworth Island on the back of a heron. But then, that particular fisherman is known for sucking down homebrew for breakfast. Do you want to know what the donkey grannies say? Rue nodded. See, the Fanes are water creatures, not human at all. There's an old story they tell. Many years ago, the water around Guernsey Island had been stormy and violent for months on end. A few local fishermen dared to go back out on it, and those who did never came back. So the fishermen got together and thought up a plan. They would send the prettiest girls in the village out on the banks at dusk to try to lure the Fane to shore, and when he stepped on land, they would capture him and keep him until he promised to quiet the sea. But the Fane was as cunning as a cat. Every evening he saw one of the girls pacing along the bank, and every evening he just laughed and swam away. One night, though, he saw a girl sitting on a rock in a quiet cove. She was as pretty as the other girls, but so odd that the people in the village would have nothing to do with her. Yet she fascinated the Fane. Night after night they met in this secret cove, talking and laughing, until one day the girl's brother spied on them and told. The next night the fishermen hid, and when the Fane came on shore to talk to the girl, they swooped in and ambushed him. But the Fane was faster. He and the girl jumped into the water, hand in hand, and the girl was never seen again. But after that, for years and years, whenever someone spotted the Fane, there was always a lovely snow-white dolphin swimming by his side. Rue rolled her eyes. Yes, well, Violet shrugged. It's a nice story anyway. My mother says our Fane is probably just some poor boy without a decent family. I've heard that in the winter he breaks into the homes of the summer people and squats there, and in the summer he camps out on some of the islands. Grannies, heaven love them, fill their hats with food and leave them by the shore when they want the river to stay calm for a ride across Clayton. There were quick footsteps on the stairs, and in a moment Miss Valentine appeared on the landing, looking agitated. We need you, she said to Violet in a pinched voice. Violet glanced quickly at Rue, as if to gauge her reaction. Then, without a word, she hurried downstairs with Miss Valentine behind her. Rue waited a moment. Then she quietly crept downstairs, stopping midway when she had a view of the lobby. Crouching down, she peered through the railing in time to see Violet and Miss Valentine rushing towards the east wing. Rue pattered down the rest of the stairs, then paused to listen. Voices were coming down the hall in the west wing. The lobby was empty, so Rue scurried across it and headed down the hall, stopping before she came to her uncle's office. Peering around the door jamb, she saw her uncle slumped in an armchair. Dr. Orlett was standing over him, patting the left side of her uncle's face with a cloth. It's getting worse, Mr. Fanshawe muttered. I told you that it might, Dr. Orlett replied calmly. Perhaps it's time for a decision. I'll decide when I'm ready, Mr. Fanshawe interrupted. Of course you will. Dr. Orlett did not sound at all offended. Hold still. You're bleeding on your shirt. Just let it be, for heaven's sake. I'm fine. Mr. Fanshawe jerked his head away from the cloth, revealing a jagged bite mark on the side of its cheek. Go tell Miss Valentine to give you a ride back over to Clayton. We're done for now, I believe. Rue had been so perplexed at the scene that she heard the footsteps too late. She turned in time to find Miss Valentine hurrying up the hall, staring at her with fury. Miss Valentine didn't say a word, which is somehow far more frightening than if she would have bellowed at her. Instead, she opened her eyes wide at Rue, jabbed her finger in the direction of the stairway, and mouthed, Now! Rue did as she was told. As she sat in bed, she tried to make sense of what she had just seen. Who had bitten her uncle like that? It couldn't have been Miss Valentine or Violet. But then who else was in the house? She thought of the humming. There was someone else living here, someone who was hidden away. Rue mulled it over as she waited for Miss Valentine to come upstairs and reprimand her, but she never did, and that was troubling too.